Hello, and welcome back. Continuing with the CCM Liberty, we're going to start working on the fuselage and the tails, servo installation, putting the motor in, all that good stuff. This pod is a little bit of a challenge. Again, this is a medium model, so it has a ballast tube, and actually I've already installed the ballast. But I can just show you briefly how that goes in. Here's the long rod, and it's got brass slugs basically, as you can see. It's fully adjustable. You can remove or add slugs. But I'm going to leave it in because I need to have it in place to organize the layout in the pod. And these are the batteries that the customer is going to be using as Hyperion 900s. So the layout in this thing is kind of cramped. Our motor setup is a 10 shock 15 turn with the Ryzen hour 5:1, and we have a Talon 60 on the back of it. I already made this up. So, ballast is in place. This is the supplied 3D printed servo tray. This is for X08H servos. I don't think I'm going to be using X08Hs in this, since this is a medium. I might use the HS08 servos or X08 Plus, just something with more torque. So anyway, so the layouts. If I put the motor in and the speed control, you can see the speed control intrudes into the canopy area quite a bit, and we're very limited with where we can place this. I would like to actually cut the nose back to 32 millimeters because I think that's going to help with CG, but at the end of the day I don't have much room in here, so if I do that I will probably run out of room. So if you put the battery in, it just barely slides under the mounting point for the ballast, and then it hits the ballast tube. So that's as far back as that battery will go. And then we have the motor in here about where it would go. And this is all the room we have left for the servo tray. So let's just see if this will even go in here. Kind of put that where it wants to be, and slide the motor back, and you can see we just barely have enough room there to get everything in. Now this is all going to be contingent on if I can get the receiver under the ballast tube, because if I can't, there's not a whole lot of other places I could put it. I could potentially put it back here, because I don't think anything is happening here. This is the hole for the connector, and then we have slots back here to hook up pushrods, which is a unique feature of this model. And we have the wire harness pre-assembled from CCM, and it's long, so it does go from this point, you know, out towards the canopy area, but we can always cut these wires down if we had to. So customers using a Spectrum setup. I know nothing about Spectrum, but you know, got to do what the customer wants. So this is an AR8 8020T receiver, and I have a feeling this won't go under the ballast tube. No, actually, yeah, it's not wanting to really. I can kind of force it to go there. I can take the case off this, and it'll probably fit if I take the case off. But let's just check if it'll fit something in here. It'd be kind of nice to just have it like plonked right there. So this won't fit there either. And then let's see. See if we can get the case off this guy. Okay, pulled the case off, and as you can see, I can get the receiver into this area. And I think we would have to put it in this way to get the wires to hook up. So that's an option there, and I'm sure now it'll go well under the, yeah, it'll definitely go under the ballast tube, but I forgot that the customer also requested this satellite be installed. It has a button on it, I guess, for binding. So I'd like to install these items somewhere fairly convenient, and if these buttons need to be pushed, there's one on the receiver too, for binding purposes, that can all be accomplished. So the satellite also came with this extension, which might be too short. You know, if it was up here, the satellite would be somewhere around here, and we couldn't reach the button unless maybe I cut a hole here or something. I don't know if I want to get into that, but I'm sure we can get a longer extension, and we could keep this satellite under the ballast tube somewhere around here, maybe even against the side. That would work, something like that, against the side of the fuselage. So I think that might be a good option there. Alright, I think I will mount the receiver back here. So let's get on with that. Let me pull the ballast out just because it makes the pod very heavy. And if I was to drop it on my foot, or just drop it in general, I'd break my foot or the pod. So just pull this guy out completely. And then I'm going to put some shrink tubing around the receiver. Alright, I put some shrink wrap around the receiver and just using my label maker to mark the channel locations. And I actually had a JR DMSS extension in stock, so I'm just going to go with that. It's I think 16 inches, so it'll work. And the plan will be to just put the receiver in something like this, and it can actually go down pretty low, so nothing will be exposed there, so that's good. And let me zoom in real quick. This is the bind button, and you can reach that quite easily, so that's great. And obviously we'll have to route these antennas somewhere because this is all carbon, and I think I'll just have them probably come out on the sides like this. Under the wing will be fine. And with the remote, I can have these guys coming out, you know, the fuselage, so that will work quite well. So we'll have 4 antennas poking out. Okay, so I really don't need to mess with the receiver anymore. It's time to address the servo tray and maybe the motor mounts. So I'm gonna have to modify this servo tray for the servos I'm gonna use. Let me show you what I got going on for the servo tray. I opened up one of the pockets to fit the HSO8 servo. I just use a Dremel tool and files for that. And that sits basically, you know, flush with the tray. And then the other one, I wanted to raise it up a bit just so I would have clearance on the push rods. Maybe I didn't have to do this, but I wanted to just in case, because I didn't want the push rod to hit the back portion of this servo here with the forward servo. So in order to do that, I actually just glued a regular servo frame on top of the tray. I made a little notch there for that arm, or the mounting point on this servo. And this is the second servo, and it just sits in like that. And so it's a little higher, so if I need to use these really short arms, or the holes on the arm, I'll still get clearance there on the servo. Again, I'm only doing this because this is kind of a heavier model and I wanted to use these stronger servos. If you're just going to use regular X08Hs, I recommend just mounting them in the tray without any modifications, and you'll be just fine. So the next thing to do is going to be just going ahead and gluing the tray in, which will be something like that. And while I'm doing that, since I'll be working with the epoxy, I'm going to go ahead and glue in the motor mount. And I'll be using the CCM 30mm motor mount for the Eisenhower gearbox. And it's nice because it has this knurling on it for better adhesion. Yeah, I had to do some sanding to prep for gluing the motor mount in. And there are some high spots and low spots that made this kind of a tight fit. So if you sand those out, you should get a really good fit, like I do here, nice and flush. So that's great. And then what I'm going to do is slip the motor and ESC in the fuse. Like that. Again, the motor mounts in. And this will help me figure out where I need to put the tray in, because I'm going to run this tray as far forward as I can. So probably something like that. Maybe we can zoom out a little bit. So the speed control is actually going to be sitting on the front edge of that. And really that's the only way I can get these batteries in and have room for everything. So this tray has to be really far forward. And since the servos are, you know, laying down, we can run wires across the top of those, no problem. So that's the general layout, and I'm going to go ahead and get some epoxy going and glue all this stuff in. In preparation for the epoxy, I just ground some notches in the tray to get better adhesion, and I tacked this tray in with just 2 spots of CA just to hold it in place. Before I did that, I sanded the pod with 80 grit sandpaper to roughen everything up and vacuumed it out, cleaned it with alcohol, and I also scuffed the bonding areas of the tray with the 80 grit sandpaper and cleaned that off as well. And I wrapped some carbon tow around the motor mount just to get like a better bond and make a stronger mount. So we're all ready to get these parts glued together. Okay, I got some epoxy with a little bit of Cabasil, not as thick as I usually have it, maybe a little thinner than mayo or mayonnaise. And I got just a little tool I'll use to apply the epoxy with. Make sure the push rods are not in the way, and we'll just get some epoxy applied here. Trying to push it down into those little notches I made. And if you're a little messy, you can come back and clean it up with a cotton bud or a Q-tip, something along those lines. I'll go ahead and do the other side. Okay, the tray is glued in. I got the epoxy on it, and I've added a little more thickener to my epoxy so it's slightly thicker, and I'm going to go ahead and apply. I also put masking tape around the nose to protect the paint, and I have scuffed up the inside of this pod and cleaned it out with some alcohol, so we'll have a good bonding surface here. And I'm just going to go ahead and apply some of this mixture. I'm not going to go crazy with it because the last thing you want to do is have it kind of get inside the mount and maybe block your ability to mount the motor and gearbox in nice and flush. So you don't have to go too crazy with it. It's probably pretty good, and I have thoroughly wetted out this carbon that I wrapped around the motor, and now I can go ahead and just slide these 2 pieces together. I think my camera battery died before I was able to show you me installing the firewall, but anyway, it fit real tight and I just pressed it in. It was so tight that I didn't have to use any masking tape to hold it in place while it cured. But it is fully cured now, so we can probably remove this tape. It's looking really good. A few stray stragglers that we can scrape off, and the tray is in there and that's cured as well. So now we can move on to hooking up the push rods to the servos for the rudder and elevator. This is the boom here, and it comes with this nice 3D printed cap to protect the push rods that are exposed. So just pull this off. And that's what you got, and here's the cap. Pretty substantial part. It's very nice. I'm gonna trim back the outer tubing on these push rods. So I'm gonna try to do it with this small pair of scissors. Well, it's not working too well, so I will try an X-Acto knife. Maybe if I just score it, I can twist it off. Yep, that worked really well. Then I still have this part here, which doesn't allow me to pull the tubing completely off. There we go. Just had to slice it a bit. That looks good. Do the same thing for the second piece, and then we're going to assemble the tails onto the boom and have a look at getting the push rods hooked up to the servos. Alright, I got the boom slid in, and there's actually a little pin and notch right here that lines everything up quite nicely. Make sure it's fully seated. And we got the ends of the carbon rods here, and there's some receptacles there that we have to hook up. But first, we'll work on getting the tail hooked up to the push rods. So I'll peel this little bit of masking tape off, and that's the push rod right here, or the horn for the elevator. That needs a screw. Here's my elevator. And we're going to need the screws for all of this. So we have our screws for the elevator and the horn. You don't need it super tight, just we need it in place. There we go, and then we have the ball link here for the rudder horn. And the rudder horn's pre-installed. So that's one less step we have to do. There's the ball for that. Now there's a hole drilled in this ball link which makes it easier to remove, but we can also use that to kind of maneuver it in place, and we should just be able to snap it on. There we go. So that's hooked up. Next thing we need to do is hook up the linkage in the slots here. This is what makes the boom removable. These can be a little fiddly. There we go. And gonna want to make sure they're fully seated before you tighten the screw down. So I'm just kind of gonna snug it a little bit. Okay, I'm pretty sure that's well seated. We'll tighten that down. Don't have to go crazy with it. And we'll do the other one same way. Okay, I got that in. Now I gotta find a screw. Let me try to find a screw for this. Alright, I found a cap head screw that fits in there nicely, and I had quite a few of them, so I might end up... It's a bigger cap head, so I might actually replace that screw with the same that I found, just so they'll match. But anyway, so the push rods are hooked up, and if I pan out with this, I can show you, I can move the push rods. So you see what that looks like. Again, we're going to make sure the boom is fully seated, and I might actually just put a bit of masking tape on there just to hold it in place. It's good. Okay, now using the supplied clevises and couplers, so we have these threaded couplers and just standard clevises. We can hook up the servos. Go. So if I move the push rod, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of eyeball the center where the rudder's centered and just put a silver or a mark with a paint pen, and then I'm just going to go full travels and see how much movement we need. And it's looking like maybe 10 millimeters each way, so we don't need a whole lot. So I'm going to use a fairly short servo arm on the rudder, and the elevator will probably be similar. So we'll do the same thing. We'll just kind of eyeball the center, put a mark here, and we'll go full travels. Yeah, we're not going to need a super long arms. I think I'm going to use the same length arms for both the rudder and elevator. And it's going to be this hole here, the second hole on the arm. So let me prep these arms. Alright, I've centered and taped up both the elevator and the rudder here. We're basically ready to get the push rods hooked up. I've done some prep on the various parts. So the you zoom in here. The servo arms I've cut down and drilled the holes out to 1.6 millimeters, and I have ground down the clevis on the back side so we can get more travel in this direction. And I've done that on both. I'm using identical length servo arms. Again, it's the second hole out on the arms here, on the single-sided arms for the HSO8s or XO8s or whatever you're going to use. And then I have these couplers, and I've actually ground little slots in them and kind of tapered the back, so the slots will allow the epoxy to kind of ooze out and key into the coupler and provide a stronger bond. So we're going to have to now mark where we're going to make our cuts. So the first thing I'm going to do is just thread in the couplers about halfway, so we have adjustment both directions if we need it later. Something like that. Okay, and now we're gonna look at getting the servos into the tray. We're gonna center the arms on the servo so they're perpendicular, and we're gonna temporarily bolt down the servo. Okay, the servos are temporarily mounted, the arms are bolted on and centered, we have the clevises attached, and what I'm gonna do now is just get my paint pen, and we're gonna work on marking the carbon push rods where we need to make the cuts. So I'll just kind of hold. I'm gonna get this wire out of the way, it's not cooperating. I'm just gonna kind of hold the clevis up here, and I'm gonna make a mark where I want to cut it. Right there. And we'll do the same thing for the other side. Like that. And now we can go ahead and trim the push rods. Got my Dremel with a cutoff wheel. Can save these as glue mixing sticks. And then the next thing I'm going to do is take my file. Actually, I might... Well, no, I'll leave the couplers attached. But I'm going to take my file and just kind of clean up the cut so there's no frays. Kind of putting a slight taper on the edge, just cleaning it up a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is file some notches. So I'm going to use the edge of the file and just file some notches into the carbon rod, top and bottom. This is just going to help the epoxy bite into the carbon rod and we'll get a really good bond. I'll do that for both. And that's kind of what it looks like there. Sorry for the shaky camera. Next thing is to just lightly scuff up the carbon. This is all in an effort to get a good bond. Do both push rods. Okay, then I'm going to vacuum up a little bit. And I have some alcohol on this makeup remover pad. I'm just going to wipe off the rods. Like that. And now we are ready to mix up some glue and get these bonded up. I'll be using JB Weld to hook up the carbon push rods to the couplers. I'm mixing that up now. Get it mixed up nice and thoroughly. And now we can work on applying this. So I'm just gonna move the wires out of the way and I'll just undo the push rod from the coupler. I have a T-pin here I'll use. Try to get some in the hole. You could use epoxy or even CA for this if you really prep your parts, clean them off well. I don't think you'd have a problem using CA. Maybe thick CA. I'll put a little bit on the carbon. Now we can try to assemble these two pieces. And I will center the servo with the servo tester in a bit after I get both of these in place. And we have some oozing out of the holes that we ground into the couplers, which is a good sign. Just do a little bit of cleanup, not too much, and then we can do the rudder as well. Again, I'll have to move the arm. Well, I pulled the whole servo out, but it's not a big deal. Just get this going here. You can do it while it's out of the fuselage, no problem. Okay, let's hook these up. Try to get the servo back in place without making a mess. There we go. And now I'll center the arms with my servo tester. There's one. There's two. Good, good, good. Just double check the tails and make sure they're still taped up where you want them. And now the next thing I'm going to do, because I am basically installing the battery between those push rods, I'm going to try to move the push rods a bit to the sides. There's a little play between the coupler and the carbon rod. Just clean this guy up a little bit. So maybe I'll try some tape. Like that. Okay, that's okay, but maybe I have a better idea. So if I get a piece of folded up foam and just stick it in there. That's doing pretty good, but I think I want a little thicker piece. Let's try this guy here. There we go. So with that foam in place, we'll let the JB weld fully cure, and we should have a pretty nice setup when we're done. So let's see how it comes out. Alright, the JB weld is dry here, so that's all good. One thing I have to address is that the push rods are not anchored well. Really, from the servo kind of all the way back to here. So I'd like to try to anchor them down in a few spots. I can do that pretty easily up here. I'm going to have to try to scuff up these outer sheaths and then bond them to the fuselage sides and also scuff up the fuselage sides. And then we'll take a look at doing something, I don't know, back here if possible. So I made some foam. This is Roacell foam kind of hold downs for the push rods, and I filed a channel in them, and they're just gonna go onto the push rods like that, and the push rod will be held against the side, and I'll slide this back quite a ways, and then I think I'm just gonna use CA to hold everything down. I've scuffed up the push rod as well as I can on both sides and the fuselage sides. So I'm just going to get these glued in. Okay, I got these push rod braces bonded in. It's working very well. And I was able to kind of get the push rod a little more tacked down in this area. So I'm happy with the stiffness. Now the next thing I'm going to try to address here is, since the servos are up here, and our receiver has to go all the way back here, I will need some extensions. So this is the motor and speed control, that'll go there, and I will need an extension for the speed control. Obviously we're going to have a Altus in between there. And then the servos as well will need extensions going from here back to the receiver. So I'm going to go ahead and make those up, and maybe I'm going to think about a way to make the installation neater. I think the speed control wire I can probably run underneath this tray, but I need to come up with a way to mount the servo wires neatly, because the last thing I want is to have a bunch of wires bundled up back here, because the battery's going in and out, and I don't want the wires to get snagged or disconnected or anything like that, or just stressed. So whatever I do with these wires, I'm going to try to secure them along the edges of the fuselage and completely out of the way of the battery, so that putting the battery in and out of the model is a easy task. Alright, I made up some extensions, taped up the connections for the servos, and I've also ran that extension for the antenna satellite. You see stuff's coming out back here. So I'm going to go ahead and try to double side tape down these wires in some kind of neat and orderly fashion. Got the wire situation sorted out. You can see I have servo wire and that satellite extension right there, and it's double side taped to the side of the fuselage. And similar situation on the other side. I have the servo wire down there. This is the speed control and Altus, double-sided taped there, and I have a little bit of double-sided tape holding that wire out of the way of the servo arm. And then I've gone ahead and attached this satellite, taped that on top of the first servo, and we have the antennas to deal with here. And this is going to be swinging a kind of a longer prop, so something like that. So I'm going to run these out of the fuselage kind of towards the back of the canopy, so we'll have to put a couple of holes for those antennas. And if we move up here, I just have this receiver mounted temporarily under the wing in this channel. And same thing back here, we have to make some exits for these antennas, and I think I'll do that like maybe in this area. So they'll be coming out like something like that. And so I need to do those. But the next thing I gotta do is work with this harness. This is the fuselage harness, and it's long enough to get from here to the front if you were to put your receiver here, which would probably be the thing to do with a light model. But for this, we're only going from here to here. So I'm gonna chop down these wires and get rid of all this excess, because I don't really feel like stuffing it in here, and we'll try to save a little bit of weight. So that's what I'm going to do next. Alright, I shortened these leads up considerably, and I don't think there's any reason why I can't go ahead and just install this plug. Should go in fairly easily. And the tooth or the notch goes towards the right. If you're looking, if that's forward. So that's what that's gonna look like. And we have a bundle of wires here, but they're a good length. Shouldn't be too hard to deal with. So I'm gonna go ahead and just drill a couple of holes and screw this plug down. Right, I might have skipped ahead a little bit, but I basically have the, well, not basically, I do have the nose pod or fuselage done on the Liberty. Speed control, got the servos all hooked up. I mounted this Spectrum satellite here. We have our antennas coming out on the fuselage, prop and spinner, and then do have the push rods anchored back here on both sides, so they're nice and stiff. And then moving back here, I got the connector for the wing installed, and I actually had to cut down this rear screw quite a bit because it was hitting the connectors on the receiver, and the receiver's in place here. And this is just a piece of double-sided tape, and the backing's still on, just so in case it lifts up it doesn't dent the wings. It's like soft double-sided tape, and to protect the receiver a little bit. And then we have exit for one antenna here for the receiver on the side of the fuselage, and one back here. And this tubing comes down and it's glued in the middle piece here and comes all the way over here, so it's easy to retract the antennas for storage, so that's not a problem. So yeah, that's basically all done. I'm happy with the way it came out. With this 900 3S pack that my customer is using, you know, basically goes in there, and the 10 shock 1515 with the Eisenhower gearbox. The CG came out to about 111 without any adjustments, and the range is I think 110 to 113, so pretty good. I'm gonna leave it there, and we're gonna maiden it like that, and you know, we can fine tune it if we have to. But yeah, I'm really happy with the way it came out, and not bad on the assembly, nothing too terribly difficult. Hope you guys found this video helpful, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks.